So we saw in our last video that Tocqueville argues that welfare, i.e. permanent state charity without conditions, and he argues that's the only kind that's viable from a practical standpoint, that kind of charity, welfare, corrupts us. It not only permanently creates this underclass, but it makes this underclass more vicious. His last reason for saying this is simply the fact that such a class would become an idle class, a class that has nothing to do. And of course, this very idleness is what we would say in normal parlance, idle time is the devil's workshop. So now, how is this the case? Why is the case that idle time does this? Now, Tocqueville provides an interesting argument from the greater to the lesser. He says, look, if you look back in the Middle Ages, and you look back in the time when society was more aristocratic, so that you had a richer class, and this richer class, because it had the serfs and the lower class working for them, they had very little to do. This class, even though it felt social responsibility to protect the lower class, and it felt it had to rule, and it had to have maintained certain moral values called nobility, even this class was corrupted by its idleness. Now, he says, how much, if that's the case with the rich aristocrats, how much more with a set of people who are at the lowest levels of society and are at that level because of a failure and a permanent lack of desire to improve their condition. Remember, he's assuming here that those who will stay in such a class aren't motivated to improve their condition. They're only motivated to survive, and this permanent state charity has already taken care of that for them. So now you have people of class their sole desire is to pursue pleasure and have no constraints, socially speaking, to be responsible for anybody else in society. They're the permanent spoiled children. What are they going to do? How much more corrupt will that idleness make them? And there's two senses in which this happens. First, think of the generation that is the receiver of the aid, like the single mother or the single out-of-work father who doesn't take responsibility for his children. This person is the kind of person who is both without hope of improvement and also without any fear of death or suffering. Thus, this person lives solely for the lowest pleasures, the animal pleasures in life, and they have that satisfied. Such a person has, he says, Tocqueville, no self-respect. In fact, such a person will feel rejected by the rest of society, permanently marginalized and alienated from the rest of society. Why would such a person feel a desire to obey the laws of such a society? Why would such a person, except by force, desire to uphold, when they can get away with it, the very laws that they could break with impunity? And thus, they, by their marginalization, by their feeling of not belonging and not being honored in such a society, by that permanent status of lack of hope, would form a gang culture, wouldn't they? They would form a rebellious culture, a culture that would not respect the law except when forced to. But there's more to it than that, because these are the people that will have children, and their children will learn from their parents. And these children will be even worse. You see, here's the interesting thing. If I look at my parents, and I see that they can have a halfway decent life without working for it, and I myself am supported by that very institution, why would I feel motivated to work or improve my condition above that of my parents? The model before me is already set, isn't it? And so what I'm taught is this. I'm taught that I deserve benefits that I don't have to work for. And I deserve them no matter how much I work or how little I work. And therefore, I'm taught that these benefits should be mine. And that when they're not mine, then I ought to take them. That there is no distinction between merit and lack of merit. That The good life is something I deserve, and I deserve it any way I can get it, and without having to work for it. Isn't that a criminal mindset? And the statistics, Tocqueville tell us, bear us out. Now what's interesting is, of course, he is writing, he says, after 200 years of the failed experiment of public state charity in England. And he says we have more than enough data because all we have to do is read the history of parliamentary debate in England and all the parliamentary inquiries that went into the success or failure of local parish charities that were run by the state. And he says, you read over and over again the correlation between illegitimate children, the birth of illegitimate children, and welfare. And that these single-parent families breed criminals. Now what's interesting is that the statistics still bear that out today. One of the more interesting statistics is the correlation, the factual correlation between children who are born of single-parent families, especially single mothers, especially boys, and their likelihood to go into a criminal lifestyle, especially gangs. They found that in delinquent institutions, in other words, in delinquent jails for those who commit crimes under 18, they found that a whopping huge majority, in most cases in the 80 percentiles, were from single-parent families. They find that actually adult offenders, there's a huge minority of 43% that are single-parent families, that come out of single-parent families. The statistics are so much there that it's almost seen as a given that you are at a disadvantage if you're born from a single-parent family, especially a boy who has only a single mother. So now, why is that important for welfare? Because another statistic has come into play. The statistic of the correlation between welfare and women having children out of wedlock. In other words, what is discovered is there are comparisons that have been made between areas or countries where they don't have welfare for single parents and those that do. And they find that those areas where there is this welfare, this social safety net, that if you have a child out of wedlock, that you're going to be supported by the state, that there's huge uptick in single parent families, in illegitimate children being born. So, thus it seems that welfare creates the incentive for single parenting. And also creates a barrier for these women or men to get married. Because it actually costs them less to just have more children and have the state support them than to get married and get a job, and actually the job they can get will not be as good as the welfare they can get. And so what we see here is welfare causes single parenting, or at least causally contributes to it, and that single parenting causes a generation that is more likely to be criminal. And so, welfare, rather than lifting those up who are at the lowest rung of society, bringing their hand closer to the ladder of success so that they might grab onto it themselves, weakens that very hand and teaches the hand to not grab that ladder, but rather to fold itself in idleness and wait for those who work the hardest to support those who work the least. And thus creates a mentality in those it seeks to purify and uplift, a mentality of marginalization, of criminality. It corrupts by making idle